Interestingly, this is a core difference between bulimia nervosa and anorexia nervosa, where we find that people with bulimia nervosa tend to have poor inhibitory control. In other words, they can't stop themselves as well from thinking, and they also often have greater difficulties in stopping themselves from doing. So if you want to think about inhibitory control as the thought mechanism and impulsivity as the behavioral mechanism. So if you're faced with something, and it's the truffles in your car, for example, if you have poor inhibitory control, you're going to be thinking about them more. And what happens about things that we think a lot about? We do them, or we feel really badly about them, but regardless, they're on our mind. They influence our thoughts and decision making. So when we put these three things together, we find that actually there are certain processes in eating disorders that seem unique to eating disorders and may set people up for developing these difficulties. Our own research, as well as research from the Institute of Psychiatry in London, Kate Chanturia and colleagues, have demonstrated that these inefficiencies exist, particularly for central coherence and set shifting in AN and BN. What's really interesting, however, and what I'm particularly compelled to talk about, is that these aren't solely related to nutritional status. So remember when Dr. Capon was talking, what's the fattest part of your body? What happens when you go on a diet? Guess what shrinks? Your brain. So, of course, you're thinking, well, a shrunken brain is not going to be a happy, healthy brain. It's not going to be an efficient brain. And while I would definitely say that that's true, I will actually say that these inefficiencies have been found not only in people who are acutely malnourished, but they seem to persist after renourishment efforts. We're actually able to show that these difficulties, particularly weak central coherence, difficulty integrating things, seems to exist regardless of renourishment efforts. These also seem to exist in non-ill family members. Currently, we're doing a study looking at adolescent females and their sisters. That study's already been done in adults. And we find that although the difficulties with set shifting and central coherence are slightly improved or functioning better in people who've never had these illnesses. In fact, there does seem to be a family risk or link among people who've never had the disease. And so one of the things that I put on here that probably doesn't make that much sense is these seem to be potential endophenotypes for these disorders. By endophenotypes, what I mean is we've been pretty unsuccessful at being able to say, hey, look at this particular gene. I think this particular gene is a problem for eating disorders. Rather, what we seem to be able to do more successfully, and I think this is an important area for us to pursue, is to be able to say, look, we're seeing these behaviors, these phenotypes, if you will, these things that we can observe, and pull back and say, why are we observing them and where are they coming from? And increasingly, we're being led back to the brain and spinal column as places that we need to look at to see whether or not there are risk and remediation factors. So when we think about it, remember that we're thinking about ways that our frontal lobe works. This is the part of the brain right here. It's the part that makes us uniquely human. It's the part that develops the most during adolescence. It's also the part that's most sensitive to any insult or injury, of which I think we could all agree that malnourishment would be considered a significant neurocognitive assault. And we've seen them in these areas in different ways and on different tasks. So set shifting and cognitive flexibility, detail orientation, and impulsivity or behavioral inhibition. And when we think about these map very well onto some of the difficulties that we see our patients having. So often what we'll see is difficulty with changing demands. People with, especially I'm sort of thinking in this, for some reason I have anorexia nervosa on my mind today. I guess that's probably because we're talking about it a lot. But it's difficult for people with anorexia nervosa sometimes to be able to shift rules, to do something different, to pay attention in a different sort of way. Often our clients will come to us and they will say, you know, I don't want to talk about food and eating, but I have to tell you, I have to clean my kitchen and I always have to do it in exactly the same way. And if I don't do it in the same way at the same time, it really is distressing to me, and I think most of you are probably going, wasn't that obsessive-compulsive disorder? But not necessarily. In fact, it can be these rigid and perfectionistic types of behaviors that we see. There can be food rituals or other types of rituals that can be impairing. And these are, in fact, set-shifting difficulties. We may have people who have difficulty writing short text messages. In fact, I whipped out my phone and showed someone a text message from one of my patients the other day, and I'm not at all kidding you. If I printed it out as an email, it would be a half a page long. I don't know about you, but until I got an iPhone, that would have been an impossible text message for me to get through. And what we have are people who are having difficulty with real-life behaviors, summarizing, shrinking things down, paying attention to the details or the broad concept of what they want to communicate. And instead, they're talking a lot and you're not really sure what the point is, or they're doing things and you're not entirely certain that they understand the details. So that integration isn't always there. And then, if we have over-inhibition, there's this coldness or this pulling back. In bulimia, we often see this real thrusting forward into life, acting without thinking, doing things, being impulsive in many other ways. So many of our patients also engage in shoplifting behaviors or reckless sexual behaviors or other things where something that feels good is done more frequently. And so one of the things that we're particularly interested in, and I'm afraid this slide didn't get on here, so I'll have to just talk about it, is now that we know this about the brain, what do we do about it? And I think this is really a fascinating place that our research is taking us. Because one of the things that we know is your brain is a plastic organ. And by that I don't mean like a little toy that you buy at McDonald's, but rather that it's very amenable to change. You can lose functioning and get it back. You can do tasks and skills that keep you sharp all the way up until you're much older. So how many people here do crossword puzzles? And then I can never say this word, so I'm going to need help with it. How about those math things? Thank you. I'm sorry, I have certain words I can't say. Esthetician is the other one. I've been practicing that one. How many people do that? Why do you guys do them? For fun? For a challenge? Anything else? What? Addiction. That actually might be a good reason. Those tasks actually change your brain. They actually help keep you sharp. They actually help keep the connections between your central brain and your forebrain active, healthy, and happy. Now, one of the things that we've come up with is this notion that you can practice these same things, work out these inefficiencies, set shifting and detail processing, by doing tasks that really bear no resemblance whatsoever to tasks of food and eating. Because here's a true thing about learning. People don't learn when they're stressed out, and they don't learn when they're emotional. People learn when they're calm and when they can focus on something that's meaningful and interesting to them. So the type of treatment that we're developing based on these neurocognitive aspects is actually something called cognitive remediation therapy. Cognitive remediation therapy, or CRT, which Dr. Locke alluded to in his talk, are a series of tasks that are not food-based, that are designed to be like a brain workout. Think of it as a brain gym for your frontal lobe, that specifically target set shifting, sensor coherence, and in some cases also impulsivity, although less so with the current work that we're doing. There are ways to expand this into working memory. There are ways to expand this into other behavioral things that we see. And these tasks are designed to sort of work out the brain and give feedback, but also to help people begin to think about their thinking. I'll be very clear, cognitive remediation therapy is not a standalone treatment for eating disorders. Instead, it's what we would consider an adjunctive or perhaps pre-therapy to get people's brains ready to engage in true therapeutic work. Because anybody who's ever been in therapy, and even those of you who don't but understand the concept, would probably understand this. When you go to therapy, it's usually to be able to change your mind about something, right? If you have set shifting difficulties, it might be difficult to change your mind. If we can work on how one changes their mind, it may be that people are more receptive to actually doing so. If you focus so much on the details that you can't understand the big picture, that when I sit and talk with you about an avocado and how an avocado has all of these wonderful, healthy, heart-healthy fats, has more bioavailable potassium, which, as Dr. Capon pointed out, is a really important feature for most of our malnourished patients. The fact that it has phytoestrogens and is sort of God's perfect fruit for fat delivery system, you're going to remember that a Hass avocado has 300 calories.